Hello and welcome to Reality Check. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor for this week. It's the iconic Chuck Norris, a guy I used to have on my bedroom wall. The martial artist hero who's still in his 80s and still kicking butt and still staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, he can work out longer, and he even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by making just one change, and he says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a special video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/Ross. That's this link below this video. It will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Ross. Now, let's get on and enjoy the show. Welcome back to Reality Check. We're now moving into that segment, which is one of my favourites, quite frankly, where I get to talk with Alex and we do a Q&A about the questions you most want answered. Alex, g'day, welcome back. Let's fire away.
The next couple of questions are about the JFK files. Ian from X asked, do you think all these JFK files are being held back because everyone knows they will show involvement with UAP or UFO crash retrieval programs?
My answer would be totally speculative. I don't know for sure, but there is a body of evidence that's on the public record, legitimate, real documents that show that in the final months of his presidency, JFK was pushing the CIA to be more open with the Soviets, with the USSR, about UFOs. And in fact, this was eventually written into a nuclear test ban treaty. There were specific references to UFOs in the treaty that reflected JFK's concern that it was needed to have some kind of interdiction because UFOs were being detected and caught on radar by both the Soviets and the Americans. And there was a genuine fear, a real worry that a nuclear war might happen because one side or the other might think that they were being attacked, when in fact it was anomalous objects, UFOs. And in fact, my good friend, Australian Jeff Cruikshank, has done a lot of work on how the CIA were involved in spoofing UFO signals in Soviet airspace because that lunatic who was running the US Air Force, Curtis LeMay, was really interested in provoking a nuclear conflagration with the Soviets early in the American administration. And thank heavens for Pippa Malmgren's wonderful dad, Harold Malmgren, who I think at the age of 27 talked down Curtis LeMay and other Air Force officials from doing this kind of extraordinarily confrontational and inflammatory thing to the Soviets. So yes, I do think there is something to the notion that JFK was interested in UAPs. There's other material on the public record which I'm less certain about, such as claims that Marilyn Monroe and other women were told things about JFK's awareness of UFOs. I just don't know, and we can't verify that. But what I am aware of is that there is documentation showing that the CIA were instructed by the president to be more open about UFOs with the Soviets. And it's long been speculated that that was one of the things that pushed the button with Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA, who I am absolutely certain played a role or had foreknowledge of the impending coup d'etat against the President of the United States. A scandal that to this day has never been properly investigated, and that we sincerely hope Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna will get to the bottom of with her investigations with her Transparency Project task force that she's got running at the moment. I mean, it's a really important thing. I am gobsmacked, Alex, that the American public aren't rattling the gates of the White House demanding to know what happened in 1963 when JFK was murdered. Because, as Congresswoman Luna has explained, There's no way it was one shooter. There's no way it was just Lee Harvey Oswald, if he was involved at all. I strongly suspect he was the patsy, and I do suspect there may well be a UFO link.
All right, I think that answered all of our JFK questions that I pulled. So we're going to move on to a question about you, Ross. Someone from YouTube is asking, are you a religious, spiritual thinker and believer?
You know, it's funny, I often tell people my parents put me through 12 years of private boys' boarding school where I had to go to church and prayers every day. And I have many religious friends. Many of them are evangelical Christians and deeply, deeply religious. I, for the life of me, have never had so much as a spark of religion in my brain. I read war comics inside the hymn books when I was at church. But what's been fascinating for me covering this UAP topic, it certainly hasn't made me believe in a conventional Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or whatever Buddhist God. But what it has made me think more is the likelihood, the probability that the human consciousness, perhaps our soul, does continue to exist after the death of our bodies. And it really does raise all sorts of interesting spiritual questions, because I do think there's a connection between the UAP issue and spiritual ideas of consciousness surviving death.
All right, we have another question from YouTube. Ross, when is the next whistleblower going to come out?
A lot depends, frankly, on what the White House does. Jake Barber's shown enormous courage, as have Fred Baker, Don Paul Bales, and John Blitch, in speaking out with us on NewsNation. I think a lot really depends on what signals come from Donald Trump. I'm hoping Donald Trump Jr. is chewing his dad's ear off and demanding that Dad do something about this UFO issue. I'm really worried at the moment that the White House is being snowed by the intelligence community. Presidents generally get fooled. They get tricked by the intelligence community. Officials come into the Oval Office, whisper national security, mumble, 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 and then all of a sudden presidents start clamping down on any disclosure about UAPs. It's happened time and time again. Presidents promise and fail to deliver. So we've got Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, Nash Patel in the FBI, John Ratcliffe in the CIA, Waltz, National Security Advisor, and Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary. All of them have indicated a desire to get to the truth of the UAP mystery. I just hope they don't get snowed. I don't detect much bipartisan support for Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna's Transparency Task Force, and I am dejected and frankly puzzled by the fact that in terms of priorities of what the Transparency Task Force should be looking at, UAP supposedly rates the lowest, and Epstein's files, of course, rate the highest. Like everyone, I mean, I've covered the Epstein story for Australian TV, and there's obviously Virginia Giuffre, who was one of his victims. It's a horrible, sordid, sad story. And I'd love to know who the VIPs were who were swanning it on Epstein's Island with little girls. It's a good story, one that should be revealed. You know, VIP pedophiles, let's expose them. But let's not forget also the UAP issue. And this is a reminder to people out there, if you're not happy with the level of interest that Congress is showing in the UAP issue, write to your congressman or your congresswoman or your senator a letter. Let them know. Democracy works like a squeaky wheel. The wheel that squeaks gets the grease. And frankly, if you don't squeal, you're not going to get the grease.
We have another question from an ex-user. He says, hey, Ross, when will you reveal the names of AARO's advisory panel? You mentioned last year you had names. We'd be interested in hearing them.
I did mention that I was aware of speculation about names of the people on the advisory panel of AARO. I'm aware of a couple of them. I guess, yeah, that's something I might be prepared to think about. Actually, to be honest with you, I've been so distracted with the Jake Barber story and following up other angles, I haven't even gone down that path. I guess also I feel that the advisory panel was just a bit of a joke. The whole thing was just a window dressing to try and make us all feel happy about the fact that we were being snowed yet again by the Pentagon. The advisory committee, frankly, wasn't doing much advice, because if there were a sensible advisory committee, they'd be advising the government that it should get out ahead and be seen to be proactively revealing what it knows, rather than being forced into some kind of catastrophic disclosure. Let me have a think about that. I truly haven't even applied my brain to it in the last few months.
We have a couple of questions about Jake Barber and the Skywatchers project. One person named Owana on X is asking, how the psionic assets learned their skills and what other methods and procedures did they learn?
It's really funny, but an hour ago I was sitting out in the middle of a grassy field right next to my home. It was pitch black, and I was trying to meditate and trying to commune with nature, looking up at this beautiful, wide, starry sky, inviting the phenomenon to engage. And of course, as usual, I failed miserably. How do they do it? Well, I do know from people who've been trained by a corporation and a military unit that there is a particular system that they've used, which generally involves teaching normally young children at times where their brain is still neuroplastic, still capable of learning how to do this stuff. It's all about synchronizing the brain. And in the lay audience world, in the world outside the black world, where we don't have the technology and the systems that they have, the best system I can think of that provides some kind of training is what's called HemiSync, HEMI-sync, SYNC. And that's run by the Monroe Institute, which is essentially an offshoot, the type of meditation. It's an offshoot of a system that was developed by the American Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA when they were working on trying to develop this program. And the HemiSync system is all about trying to synchronize the two hemispheres of the brain. I really recommend people listening to the binaural tones that HemiSync uses. It's a subscription thing. You've got to pay to get the system, but it's well worth it. In terms of good meditative practice, which I recommend everybody does.
Linda from YouTube asked if that process of luring the UAP is possibly tricking or harming whoever it might be on board or piloting that craft, and is it ethical?
Okay. Now you're asking, I think, here about Skywatcher. So
Correct.
I think there are two delineations. What's been happening inside the black world system is, I think, illegal, immoral, and utterly bloody outrageous. We've been summoning or inviting, we can't really summon, we've been inviting non-human craft, allegedly, to come close, and then at times we have been hitting them with high pulse microwaves and bringing them down. And let's assume, hypothetically, that there is a biologic on board, some kind of non-human entity that's an organism or an entity. Whatever has happened to that entity is unclear to me, but basically it's fair to assume that if their craft has been brought down violently, they've been hurt in the process. And certainly if there was an entity in the craft or the object that Jake Barber engaged with, certainly in what Jake's described to me, he was feeling distress. Now, I can't speak for Skywatcher, and for good reason. They're being very secretive at the moment about what they're doing and how it's going. Jake has indicated through his Twitter feed that things are going very positively, and we're all keeping our fingers crossed that they're going to be able to make a successful invitation to a non-human craft, and that they might even be able to achieve a recovery by landing, by encouraging one to land. I am told, and I can't speak for Skywatcher, but I'm told on the QT by people that there is a very strong moral code, ethical code being applied by the people doing the invitation. They are not willing to be involved in any kind of violent bringing down of a craft, and they've got very strong ethical procedures for how they intend to proceed. I would love, in fact, I've invited Alex Clokas from the Aeneas Explorers Club, who's the guy that's conceived Skywatcher. I've invited Alex to actually come on the show. I would love to talk to him about this because there are a lot of people contacting me at the moment with a lot of spurious, I know to be spurious, concerns and worries about Skywatcher's ethics and morals. What I do know informally from people on the Skywatcher team is that they believe that they're conducting themselves with absolute propriety and they're at pains to delineate their behaviour from what's been going on in the black world because they want to be seen as moral and they want to be seen as loving and friendly and welcoming. So I'm hoping I can get at some stage the Skywatcher people on the record to talk about this because it'd be a really good way to clear the air, to show accountability and transparency about what they're planning to do. Working on that one.
All right, our next question takes us to Australia. Adam from YouTube asks, hey Ross, do you know anything about the rumored extraterrestrial base below Mount Zeil, an hour's drive west of Pine Gap? Apparently, the two sites are connected.
Oh boy, I have been to Mount Zeil. Okay, so the story about Mount Zeil is a cracker. When I was researching my book, I was actually in Alice Springs for a completely different story for a TV show. And I drove at considerable time and distance way out to Mount Zeil because during the Stargate program, when there was remote viewing, which of course is complete pseudoscience and not true, just for Mick West's benefit there. So when the CIA was doing remote viewing, which it still continues to do, by the way, which a lot of people accuse of being pseudoscience, the remote viewer, I think it was Ingo Swann, allegedly detected an alien base in 4 places in the world. And it was hidden in a hill called Mount Zeil in Australia. And Mount Zeil, interestingly enough, is very close to what is the most sensitive base for the United States outside of the continental USA, the Pine Gap Joint Facility between Australia and the United States. It was originally a base where the DSP, the Defence Support Program satellites that were sending back feeds of flashes in the on the planet of ballistic missile launches, they wanted to keep it really, really secure, and they didn't want the Chinese or the Russians to be able to get their then unencrypted downlinks from the satellites. And so they put it in Pine Gap where they could receive these signals and get these signals from the satellites without interdiction from the bad guys. And it's become much bigger than that. Pine Gap has become the most important base for the US outside the United States. And I don't think it's any coincidence that if there is a non-human intelligence with a base nearby, it's right nearby Pine Gap, because that's where I'd put it if I was an alien. We obviously don't know. I've been out to Mount Zeil. It's just a barren wilderness. And Mount Zeil, it's not even really a mountain. It's just a hill in the middle of the outback covered with poisonous snakes and spiders and scorpions and lots of red rocks. And I didn't see any signs of human habitation or non-human habitation. It was just lovely to be able to talk about it for my book.
All right, Carlito from X asks, Ross, to your knowledge, any European governments aware of the existence of NHI? This person is particularly asking about France, but I'd be curious to know overall anywhere in Europe.
Okay, so I include Russia in Europe. At least Russia is European up to the Urals. I checked this just the other day because it was a question in a cryptic crossword whether Russia was indeed a member of Europe. So Russia definitely knows. I'm in absolutely no doubt that Russia is fully aware of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. I'm sure France is as well, because they've had GEPIN, which is their UFO official government investigation office, going for many decades now. And it's genuinely the most impressive UFO investigation office of any government in the world, rather than the Pentagon that sticks its head up its bottom and basically tries to pretend that there are no UAPs. The French are actually quite open. I've had conversations with people in France where they quite candidly admit that they believe that they are being visited by non-human intelligences, and they've been collecting data for many, many years, kind of in the same way that the Americans were doing with Project Blue Book up until about 1970. And then moving through Europe, I'm not sure about the Germans, but I'm actually talking to people in the Spanish government at the moment who've been sharing with me some interesting information about alleged encounters with the Spanish military and UAPs some decades back. Um, I certainly know there are people in both the British and Spanish governments who are interested in and aware of the UAP issue, but of course the formal position is one of the normal categorical denial, head in the sand. Um, Britain, I'm pretty confident the British government has been involved in retrievals with the Americans. I don't think political leadership has been briefed in all the time. I'm pretty sure Margaret Thatcher knew about the UAPs because she indicated as much to a woman called Georgina Bruni. And it's a great quote from Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister. She actually said, when she was asked about UAPs and particularly the Rendlesham incident, she allegedly leaned across to Georgina Bruni, this journalist author, at a party and said, "You can't tell the people." And one wonders why. But no, I do think that there are European governments, individuals certainly within the intelligence services and the military, who have certainly assisted the Americans with retrievals. I think what's happened with my country in Australia, by the way, is that my government unwittingly has given support to UAP retrievals, but I've spoken to a host of different politicians who've been in both defence, intelligence, and prime ministerial roles, like the top of our government, and I'm pretty sure they've been hoodwinked. But I'm pretty sure that there are people in our military that have been directly involved in retrievals. But in terms of European governments, I think officially the Russians know, I think officially the French know, and so do the British. I suspect they've kept all the other Europeans in the dark. And that's actually really interesting, by the way. That's why I think there's a bit of a pushback from Western Europe about the benefits of the Five Eyes alliance. Because if you think about it, there are all of these NATO countries that have been collaborating and being part of an alliance with America for the last 70, 80 years. And they've been colluding on intelligence sharing, those that are part of the Five Eyes, Britain, and Australia and New Zealand and Canada. But one questions whether the Americans have been as open as they should have been with their allies about this UAP secret. It's becoming increasingly clear that they haven't. And that's a big issue. You know, to what extent is the American government frightened of admitting what it does know about UAPs because it has so transparently misled, deceived, lied to its allies?
This is a great question to end on. A user on X asked Ross, what would you ask or say to NHI if you ever met them?
Oh, wow, what a good question. Um, I think the first thing I would ask is I would try and resolve that key debate question. Obviously, let's talk about it. It's the argument, are they malevolent or are they benevolent? Or are they both? What are your intentions? You've got people on one side of the spectrum, like Stephen Greer from the Disclosure Project, who has consistently argued that we're being fed a threat narrative by psyops inside the CIA and the Defense Department, and that in fact the non-human intelligences are in fact benevolently inclined towards humanity, and that we pose no threat from, there's no threat posed from them to us. At the other end of the spectrum, I guess that's one of the things that Greer's taken issue with Lou Elizondo, because Lou sees things through a national security prism, and he's talked about the threat. And there's been a lot of savagery. There's the pro-Greer activists online, and there's the anti-Greer activists online. I don't know where I stand on this. I mean, I would love to ask an intelligent, non-human being, what are your intentions? Why have you not engaged publicly and overtly with us? What's the reason for the secrecy? Is there like a Star Trek non-intervention order, prime directive that you're not allowed to show yourself? I think that's the biggest thing that intrigues me, is that there is a central mystery behind the UFO mystery. What are they hiding and why?
All right. Thank you so much, Ross.
We're all done?
We're all done. You answered a lot of questions. I'm sure we'll get more next week.
No problem. Alex, lovely to work with you yet again. And please send in your questions to our email, realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. And whenever we get the chance, as we're doing today, Alex and I will endeavour to answer your questions. Thanks very much for joining us.